The back steps of First Baptist Church of Harlan, Kentucky looked like nothing. A Hells Angels rider was inside the food pantry, alone, dropping off a donation nobody would ever know he made. Cold concrete outside, a side lot, a crow on the fence post, the particular gray of a hollow town in early March when winter hasn't let go yet. But on that step sat a 5-year-old girl in sock feet, because she had given her shoes to her twin sister before her sister walked 4 blocks alone to find help. 11 days, 1 meal a day, a bedroom with a deadbolt on the outside and a window nailed shut. 3 times Faye Crane had tried to make someone hear her, and 3 times the adults had chosen the easier explanation. So she wrote it in brown crayon on the back of a coloring book page. 7 words, 1 misspelling that proved beyond any doubt a child had written them. And she slid it under his door. What Porter Reese found on the other side would bring 156 motorcycles to a single street before sundown. If those words hit you the way they hit me, stay with me, because we're only just beginning. Subscribe to Valiant Bikers if you believe every child deserves someone who answers. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this reaches. Now. Back to that afternoon in Harlan. Opal's on the back step. She doesn't have shoes. That was the first thing Faye Crane said to a grown man she had never met, after 11 days of nobody listening. Not hello, not, I'm scared. She told him about her sister first. That single sentence will tell you everything you need to know about who Faye was at 5 years old. Porter Reese was on one knee inside the First Baptist food pantry, setting down the second of 2 cardboard boxes when the paper appeared. It slid under the gap in the back door, barely audible, just the whisper of folded coloring book paper crossing a concrete threshold, and came to rest against the toe of his work boot. Porter had been making this donation run for 11 years. 3rd Saturday of every month, 2 boxes of canned goods and $400 cash dropped at the food pantry back door while the congregation was still inside for afternoon service. He never stayed. He didn't want recognition. He just left the boxes and went. But this Saturday, he didn't leave. He looked at the paper, picked it up, unfolded it. He was a big man, 6 feet, 216 pounds, hands permanently stained with machine oil from 16 years of running the only small engine repair shop in Harlan County. He reached into his vest pocket for his reading glasses. Put them on. Read the note once. Read it again. Then he stood up very slowly and opened the door. The girl standing 3 feet back was small and cold and ready to run. Brown eyes, determined, a pink hoodie with a missing zipper pull, 1 yellow sock and 1 white sock, because she'd dressed in the dark. A scrape on her right knee that had dried to rust-colored lines. She looked at his hands first, the oil stains, the tattoo on his right forearm, the reading glasses. And then she looked at his face. She did not run. "Are you the one who wrote this?" Porter said. She nodded. Then, before he could ask another question, "Opal's on the back step. She doesn't have shoes." Porter stepped outside. He looked right. Opal was sitting on the concrete step at the corner of the building, knees pulled to her chest, wearing a purple sweater 2 sizes too large and a pair of socks on bare feet. She hadn't looked up yet. She was very still, in the particular way of a child who has learned that staying still keeps things from getting worse. Porter walked to her, Not fast, not slow. He didn't crouch, didn't announce himself, didn't do any of the things adults do when they're trying to seem safe and end up seeming more frightening. He just walked to her, unzipped his riding jacket, and wrapped it around her shoulders before he said a word. She didn't pull away. Something fell from Faye's hoodie pocket as she came up behind them. 2 small rectangles of folded paper, water-damaged at the corners, falling to the concrete step. Porter picked them up and looked at them. Birthday cards. He could tell that much. Rain-soaked at some point. The handwriting inside had blurred, but not disappeared. Faye took them from him carefully and slid them into the jacket pocket, now wrapped around her sister. "So they don't fall again," she said. Porter looked at her for a moment. Then he held the food pantry door open and stood to the side. "You did right," he said. "Both of you. Come inside." The cold was 39 degrees and dropping. Opal had been on that step for 14 minutes. Porter had, he estimated, about 10 minutes before her temperature became a medical problem. He didn't say this out loud. He noted it the way a man notes a deadline, quietly, without panic, with intention. Inside the pantry, he found a folded emergency blanket in the donation supplies and wrapped it around Opal's feet. He asked one question. "When did you last eat?" The girls looked at each other. It was Faye who answered. "Yesterday morning." Porter's jaw tightened once. That was all. He reached into one of his donation boxes and pulled out a can of peanut butter crackers, the kind that came in orange packaging, the kind he'd bought for the pantry without thinking about it, the kind that were suddenly the most important thing in either of those boxes. He opened them and set them on the shelf in front of the girls without making it a big moment, without commentary, the same way you'd set food in front of anyone who needed to eat. Faye watched him. Then she took 2 crackers. She handed one to Opal first. Porter stood back and let them eat. He kept his face neutral. But something had gone very still inside him, the way still water looks calm from the outside and is doing everything underneath. He had been 9 years old once, on the other side of a locked door, eating when it was convenient for someone else. For 3 years, nobody came. Until a neighbor finally made a call. Porter had never forgotten what it felt like to wait. He looked at these 2 girls. One with someone else's shoes because she'd given hers away, one who hadn't spoken to an adult in 11 days, and understood, without them having to explain, exactly what kind of house they'd come from. What he didn't know yet was how deep it went. The pantry coordinator, a woman named June, who left the back door cracked for Porter every 3rd Saturday, appeared in the doorway that connected to the church hallway. She saw the girls, saw Porter's expression, and stopped. "Porter, I need 10 minutes, he said, "and I need the back door locked." June looked at the girls, back at Porter. She nodded and disappeared. The pantry was warm. It smelled of canned goods and old wood, and the particular dusty warmth of a room that had been holding donated food since 1987. A crow called outside. The heating unit in the corner ticked. Faye finished her crackers and folded the wrapper into a small square, the way a careful child does when she's been taught to be tidy. Then she looked at Porter. "Our mama is at the county lockup," she said. "Beverly won't let her call us." Porter set his forearms on the donation shelf and looked at her level. "How long?" 11 days? Faye said it like a number she had been counting carefully. "Has anyone else tried to help you?" Something flickered across her face. Not hurt, exactly. The specific expression of a person who has been failed enough times to have stopped being surprised by it. "I told Mrs. Gentry through the fence. She told Beverly. Beverly said we were dramatic. She paused. I put a note under the neighbor's door on day 7. They slid it back. She didn't say they slid it back with bitterness. She said it factually, the way you'd report weather, which was somehow worse, because here was a 5-year-old who had already learned to expect nothing, and she had written the note anyway. Opal had not spoken yet. She sat with the emergency blanket around her feet and Porter's riding jacket around her shoulders and watched her sister talk. Her brown eyes, identical to Faye's, moved between Faye and Porter with careful attention, the way you watch two things you're not sure you can trust yet. Then Opal looked directly at Porter. She opened her mouth. She won't let Mama call. Her voice was small and slightly hoarse, like a voice that hadn't been used in a while. We don't know where Mama is. Porter looked at her steadily. I know where she is, he said, and she's going to know you're safe before the sun goes down. Opal looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once and went back to watching. That was the moment. That nod. Porter would think about it later. What it cost a 5-year-old who hadn't trusted an adult in 11 days to nod yes. Faye reached into the pocket of her pink hoodie. She placed something on the donation shelf beside the cracker wrapper. It was a second piece of coloring book paper. Same brown crayon. Same careful large letters. Porter picked it up. His reading glasses were still on. It was a transcript. A child's phonetic reconstruction of a phone conversation, written in the dark, memorized word by word, reproduced in the handwriting of someone who had understood, at 5 years old, that the words were important and needed to be kept. Beverly said $1,588 a month. She said she'd be a fool not to fight for it. She said Mama can visit, but Beverly controls the schedule. Donna asked, don't you feel bad for the girls? Beverly said they'll adjust, children always do. The pantry was quiet. The heating unit ticked. Outside, a car moved slowly down Church Street. Porter put the note in his vest pocket beside the first one. Then he stood up straight, pulled out his phone, and looked at the time. 3:47 p.m. He had 4 calls to make. If this story hits you the way it hit me when I first heard it, if you think every child deserves someone who picks up the note, subscribe to Valiant Bikers and stay with me. Comment your city below, because what happens next is about more than 2 little girls. It's about what one town built around them. The first call lasted 40 seconds. Blaine, it's Porter. Blaine Diesel Combs was 53 years old, ran the Harlan County chapter, and had raised 4 children alone in these hollows while doing it. He knew every family court judge in eastern Kentucky by first name. He'd seen Beverly Stokes' kind of petition before. When Porter finished speaking, there was a pause of about 2 seconds. How old? 5, twins, 11 days. Another pause. Send me the note. Porter photographed both pieces of coloring book paper and sent them. He heard Diesel's sharp intake of breath when they came through. Then, give me 15 minutes. The second call went to Cinder, Raymond Cinder Hogg, 55 years old, former Kentucky Cabinet for Health and Family Services investigator, 18 years on the job before he quit in 2021 after a flagged case got buried. He knew which family court statute Beverly's petition violated. He knew how to file a counter motion before a Monday morning hearing. When Porter told him about the petition to block Lena's return, Cinder went quiet for exactly the kind of pause that meant he was already thinking 3 steps ahead. She filed on day 3? March 14th. Before the 72-hour medical check was even completed. Cinder's voice was flat. Porter, this isn't impulse. She had the lawyer lined up before the girls' beds were even cold. The third call went to Ironside. Dale Ironside Marsh, 60 years old, retired Harlan County Sheriff's deputy, 24 years. His first question was the one that needed asking. The mother, does she know? She doesn't know anything. Beverly's been blocking the collect calls. A long pause. I'll call the detention center. Lena Crane will hear her daughter's voices before 5 o'clock. The fourth call was to Razorback. Frank Razorback Pruitt, 52, former EMT for 16 years in Bell County. Porter told him about Opal's sock feet on the cold concrete step, about Faye's scraped knee, about 11 days of 1 meal a day. Razorback said, "Don't move them until I get there." By 3:58 p.m., the group text had gone out. Not from Porter, from Diesel. 4 words and a location. Millbrook Hollow. Bring everyone. The Harlan County chapter got it first. 44 brothers. Bell County was next. 38. Letcher County, 41. Knox County, 33. The group text went out at 3:51 p.m. By 4:15, 112 confirmed responses. By 4:30, the number was 156, with more still rolling in from surrounding hollows. Not one of them asked for details, not one asked for proof. Diesel had made the call. Porter had found what he found. That was enough. In Harlan, Kentucky, in the particular silence of a hollow town in early March, 156 engines turned over within the span of an hour. Now, I know what you might be thinking. You might be picturing 156 Hell's Angels descending on a residential street with exactly the kind of noise and menace that makes national news. You might be thinking this is where the story turns chaotic, righteous, and loud and hot. That's not what happened. What rolled down Millbrook Hollow Road at 5:15 p.m. was disciplined, measured. The rumble started low and distant, like the first roll of thunder before a front moves through. And then it grew until it shook the windows of the houses on either side of the road. But when the engines cut, and they cut almost simultaneously, the silence falling like a curtain, 156 bikers stood in formation on both sides of Millbrook Hollow Road without saying a word. No fists, no shouting, no threatening, just presence. Just the particular quiet of men who have already made a decision and are waiting for the moment to confirm it. Beverly Stokes's car would not reach her driveway, but that's later. Back in the food pantry at 4:02 p.m., Razorback arrived with a first aid kit and the specific expression of a man who has seen what food restriction does to a child's body and is keeping his face professional by effort of will. He examined Opal's feet, cold, circulation slower than it should be, but no permanent damage. He examined Faye's scraped knee, cleaned it without flinching, put a proper bandage on it. He weighed them both on the pantry's old donation scale, the kind that gets used to weigh bulk goods. He looked at his own clipboard, looked at Porter, said nothing. Porter said, "Give me the number." 6 pounds each, below normal for their age. Razorback's voice was professionally flat. In 11 days. Porter stood with that information for a moment. The heating unit ticked. Somewhere on the church grounds, a crow called twice and went silent. Spectre, Nathan Spectre Vance, 39, the chapter's documentation member, arrived 10 minutes after Razorback. He photographed both pieces of coloring book paper under good light, made digital copies, time-stamped everything. He didn't do it dramatically. He did it the way you do something that matters, carefully and without comment. Porter sat down across from Faye. He'd moved a folding chair to her level without making it obvious. He said, "I was 9 years old, and someone finally opened a door for me after 3 years of nobody opening it." Faye looked at him. "Nobody opened yours either?" "Nobody opened mine either." The pantry was quiet for a moment. "You didn't wait 3 years," Porter said. "You wrote it down. You slid it under the door. You left your shoes for your sister." He paused. "That's the bravest thing I've seen in 48 years. Opal, who had been very still, shifted in her chair. She reached into the pocket of Porter's jacket, still draped around her, and pulled out one of the rain-damaged birthday cards. She looked at it for a moment. Then she held it toward Porter. He took it carefully. It was a child's birthday card, the kind sold in pharmacies. The message inside had blurred in whatever water had reached it. A hollow roof, maybe, or a box left in rain. But the handwriting was still readable in places. "For my girls on their birthday. Daddy loves you to..." The rest was gone. "Beverly threw them away," Faye said. "I found them in her recycling bin on day 3. Porter looked at the blurred words. Then he looked at both girls. "Your daddy left you something," he said. "And you kept it." Opal nodded. She held her hand out for the card. He returned it. "Beverly is filing to keep you from going back to your mama," Porter said. He said it directly because Faye had already heard the phone call and written it down in brown crayon, and she deserved directness. "She has a hearing in 19 days. We're going to stop it." Faye looked at him carefully. "Can you do that?" "Cinder can," Porter said. "He spent 18 years doing exactly this kind of work, and he's already on the phone." Faye considered this. Beverly said the court already decided. "Beverly told the court what Beverly wanted them to hear," Porter said. "The court hasn't heard from anyone else yet." He held up the 2 pieces of coloring book paper. "They're going to hear from you." And what he didn't know yet, what none of them knew, was that Beverly Stokes had done this before. Not to children, to someone who couldn't write a note and slip it under a door. Someone who had told her pastor she felt like a prisoner, and watched him pray for her and leave. The folder that would prove it was sitting in Beverly's filing cabinet at 29 Millbrook Hollow Road, inside a manila envelope labeled Financial. And Spector was going to find it. At 4:24 p.m., Porter's phone lit up with a call he'd been waiting for. He stepped to the corner of the pantry, away from the girls. Ironside's voice came through. "Lena Crane is on the line." Porter brought the phone to Faye. He held it out. Faye looked at it. For the first time since she'd walked around that building and slid a note under a door, her face stopped being decided and became, for just a moment, 5 years old. "Mama?" she said. The sound that came through the phone from the Harlan County Detention Center. The sound of Lena Crane, who had called 9 times and heard nothing, who had not known for 11 days whether her daughters were eating or sleeping or safe, was not something Porter would ever describe to anyone. Some sounds belong only to the people in them. He stepped to the other side of the pantry and looked at the canned goods on the shelves while both girls pressed close to the phone. Outside, the hollow was getting darker. The temperature was still dropping, and 156 motorcycles were moving through eastern Kentucky toward a single road. In his vest pocket, Porter still had 2 pieces of coloring book paper with brown crayon writing on them. "Please don't tell her." And armed with the notes, the testimony of 2 5-year-old girls, and a network that stretched across 4 counties, Porter Reese was about to walk into the last 20 minutes of Beverly Stokes' performance. Beverly Stokes' car turned onto Millbrook Hollow Road at 5:22 p.m. She'd stayed late at the church fund committee meeting. There were invoices to review, a contractor payment to authorize, the particular pleasure of being the most competent person in a room, which Beverly had cultivated for 30 years. She had her committee folder on the passenger seat, her reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck, a takeout bag from the diner on Mound Street. She was thinking about what she'd tell the girls for dinner, that she'd eaten already, that there was cereal, that they could have a bowl if they were quiet about it. She didn't see the bikes until she'd already turned. They stretched in both directions down Millbrook Hollow Road, parked tight to the curb, engines off, 156 motorcycles in the particular Appalachian quiet that told you something had already been decided before you arrived. The chrome caught the last of the late afternoon light. The leather jackets all bore the same insignia, and they were standing. Not sitting on their bikes, not milling around. Standing, in the road, facing her car. Beverly's foot came off the gas. The car rolled to a slow stop 2 houses short of her driveway. She sat there for a moment, took off her reading glasses, put them back on. The scene did not change. Now, I want to pause here for a moment, because I know exactly what some of you are picturing. You're picturing what comes next as noise, as menace, as 156 men with nothing in their eyes but anger and the promise of something violent. You've seen the movies. You know the story about bikers descending on a street. That's not what Beverly Stokes got. What she got was silence. Organized, deliberate, unanimous silence. Not one voice raised, not one engine running. Just the weight of 156 men standing in a hollow road in early March, with the particular patience of people who have already done the hard work and are simply waiting for the paperwork to confirm it. Diesel was at the front, arms crossed, not moving. Behind him, 4 columns of brothers. Not a protest, not a mob, a presence. The distinction mattered, and every man in that formation understood it. Beverly did not get out of the car immediately. She sat for 47 seconds, Porter counted, before the driver's door opened. She stepped out with her committee folder held against her chest. Her reading glasses were on. She had arranged her expression into something resembling confused inconvenience, the face of a woman who has been interrupted during a normal day and would like an explanation. "What is going on here?" she said. Measured, slightly martyred, the voice she used with people who needed managing. Diesel looked at her for a moment without speaking. Then he said, "Where are the girls, Beverly?" A half-second pause. Almost invisible. Her expression didn't change. "They're inside. I've been at a church meeting. I left them with a neighbor." She looked past him at the row of bikes. "I don't know what you think you're doing on my street, but—" "Which neighbor?" Another pause, slightly longer this time. "Excuse me?" "The neighbor you left 2 5-year-olds with. Which one?" Diesel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Beverly's shoulders dropped. A practiced movement, palms opening, head tilting. The specific body language of a woman who had learned that appearing reasonable gets you further than appearing defensive. "I don't know who called you people, But I am this family's court-appointed guardian. I have documentation. Whatever you think you know. We have the notes, Porter said. He'd been standing to Diesel's left, and Beverly had not seen him yet, or hadn't wanted to see him. She turned her head. Her gaze went to the 2 pieces of coloring book paper he held. The pantomime of confused inconvenience slipped for exactly 1 second. 1 second, during which Beverly Stokes's face showed something true. Not fear, not guilt, not remorse. Something more precise than any of those. The expression of a person who has been careful for 11 days and has just registered that the carefulness wasn't enough. Then the expression closed back over, and she said, "Those girls have vivid imaginations. They've been through a trauma. Whatever they told you, Beverly." Diesel's voice was flat and quiet. "Cinder, walk her through it." Cinder stepped forward. Raymond Hogg, 55, former CHFS investigator, 18 years, the kind of man who had spent nearly 2 decades watching people construct narratives around their own behavior and learning to read the seams in the fabric. He had a folder, not a dramatic folder, the plain manila kind. He opened it. "Social Security dependent payments," he said. $1,588 a month, deposited March 15th. 1 full payment already received. He turned a page. A petition to extend guardianship filed March 14th, 3 days after taking the girls, before the mandatory 72-hour medical check was completed. He turned another page. No school enrollment in 11 days, no pediatric appointment, 1 meal per day based on the girls' reported caloric intake and a weight check performed this afternoon by a former EMT. He looked up. 6 pounds underweight each. In 11 days, Beverly. Beverly's committee folder was pressed very tightly to her chest. "The 72-hour medical requirement," Cinder continued, "is Harlan County Family Court standing order. It's not a suggestion. It's a condition of emergency guardianship. You didn't complete it. Your petition to extend guardianship was filed before you'd even met that basic condition." He closed the folder. "The family court judge in this county has been a colleague of mine for 11 years. She's going to hear about the medical check at 9 a.m. Monday morning." "I had an appointment scheduled." "Where's the confirmation?" Cinder said. Beverly looked at him. "Appointment confirmation," he said. "If it was scheduled, there's a confirmation number." "Where is it?" The hollow was very quiet. Someone's porch light clicked on down the road. The temperature had dropped another 2 degrees since sundown. Beverly said nothing. "Thought so," Cinder said, and stepped back. Spector moved next. He had spent the past 90 minutes at 29 Millbrook Hollow Road, having gone through the house with 2 Harlan County Sheriff's deputies who had arrived at 5:04 p.m. on the strength of Ironside's call, and a deputy who owed that retired 24-year man more than a favor. Spector was not a theatrical person. He documented things. He photographed things. He presented what he'd found the way an accountant presents a balance sheet, without inflection. In order, letting the numbers speak. "Bedroom," he said. He turned his phone toward Beverly. The photograph showed the back bedroom of 29 Millbrook Hollow Road, 10 feet by 9, 1 mattress on the floor, 1 blanket, a coloring book with 4 crayons, a deadbolt on the outside of the door, a window with 2 nails driven through the frame to prevent it from opening more than 2 inches. "That's for safety," Beverly said. "They sleepwalk." "Both of them?" Spector said. "Installed within 48 hours of taking guardianship, according to the hardware store clerk in town who sold you the bolt. He remembers you because you bought 3 extra screws and he helped you carry them to your car. He swiped to the next photograph. The kitchen lock. Keyed deadbolt. Exterior only. Girls cannot access the kitchen independently. He swiped again. Beverly's bank account. Subpoena's already been filed. This was from a text screenshot provided voluntarily by Donna Pruitt 40 minutes ago. $3,420 in personal spending since March 8th. Living room furniture, a weekend in Lexington, a church gala outfit purchased the same day the Social Security payment arrived. He put his phone away. In the same 11 days, you fed 2 children 1 meal per day. Donna Pruitt, 41, of Harlan, Kentucky, who had been Beverly Stokes' closest friend for 9 years and had known about the Social Security payments since the night Beverly called her from the kitchen, while 2 5-year-olds pressed their ears against a locked door. Donna Pruitt had broken in approximately 7 minutes when Diesel sat down across from her at her kitchen table. She hadn't needed much pressure. That was the thing about people like Donna, the ones who told themselves they weren't doing anything wrong. They broke fast because the guilt was already there, sitting on their chest, waiting for someone to give them an exit. Diesel had simply opened the door. She told me the first week, Donna said. Her hands were wrapped around a coffee mug she wasn't drinking. About the SS payments. I told her, I said, Beverly, are you sure about this? And she said it was her right, as the guardian. Donna looked at the table. I didn't. I didn't know about the food. I didn't know they were being locked in. I thought she was managing things. Did she tell you about the petition? Diesel said. Yes. Donna's voice was very small. She said she was going to keep them. For the long term. She said Lena was unfit. She finally looked up. Lena's not unfit. Lena had one charge. Beverly told the court. Beverly told everyone. But I knew. I knew what Lena was like before the arrest, and I said nothing. Her voice broke on the last word. I said nothing. Diesel stood up. He looked at her steadily. You're going to write down everything Beverly told you, and you're going to sign it. Tonight. Donna nodded. She was already reaching for a notepad. Mrs. Pauline Gentry, 67, had been watching from her kitchen window since the bikes arrived. When Walt Knotwood Haig, 69, club elder, a man who had driven a hollow road in 1987 to help a family nobody else would touch, came to her door and knocked. She opened it immediately. She'd been waiting for someone to knock for 8 days. I knew, she said, before he'd said more than his name. I knew on day 4 when Faye told me through the fence. I told Beverly, and Beverly said they were dramatic, and I brought a casserole. I thought I'd helped. She shook her head. I watched that bedroom window every single day after that. I saw it was nailed shut, and I told myself there was probably a reason. Children sleepwalk. Maybe she had a reason. The specific grief of a woman who has spent 8 days negotiating with herself was in every line of her face. I should have called someone. I knew what I was seeing. Knotwood sat with her on the porch in the cold. He didn't rush her, and he didn't let her collapse into self-recrimination. He said, reporting it tonight still counts. Pauline Gentry looked at him. It counts, he said again. Make the call. She went inside for her phone. Pastor William Hodge, 58, First Baptist Harlan, arrived at the scene at 5:47 p.m. because he'd seen the bikes from the church and come to find out what was happening. He was told, in the parking lot of his own church, by Cinder, with specificity and without softness, about Beverly Stokes' current situation. He was also told about Ruth Ellen Stokes, who had been Beverly's mother, who had died in Beverly's care in November 2020, after telling him, telling him directly during a pastoral visit that she felt like a prisoner. Pastor Hodge stood with that information for a long moment. He was not a bad man. He was a man who had chosen institutional comfort over difficult truth and was now being asked to reckon with the cost of that choice at 5:47 on a Saturday evening in a church parking lot. "She said it to me in those words," he said. He wasn't asking. He was remembering. "I felt like a prisoner. I prayed with her. I left." "You did," Cinder said. "Ruth died 6 weeks later." "She did." The pastor looked at the road, at the formation of bikes, at Beverly Stokes, still standing by her car, committee folder pressed to her chest, reading glasses on, the performance of reasonable inconvenience getting harder to sustain as each piece of documentation emerged. "What can I do?" Hodge said. "Not what do you need from me, not what are my obligations here. What can I do?" The question of a man who understands he is late and intends to be useful anyway. "Write down what Ruth told you," Cinder said. "Date, her exact words, your response. Signed." He paused. "And when this goes to family court Monday morning, your presence will matter." Hodge nodded. He pulled out his phone and began typing before he'd walked back to the church. Beverly's last stand came at 6:14 p.m., when the Harlan County Sheriff's deputies moved toward her car. She saw them coming, and something shifted in her posture. The committee folder lowering, the reading glasses coming off, her weight redistributing in the way of a person recalculating. The charm offensive came first. Her shoulders dropped. Her palms opened. She produced a short, slightly self-deprecating exhale, the sound of someone who has decided that humor might diffuse the room. "Look, I know how this looks, but I am the responsible adult in this situation. I have been managing 2 traumatized children under genuinely difficult circumstances, and I think if anyone actually takes the time to review my records, rather than listening to—" She gestured toward the notes Spector had photographed, crayon drawings from a 5-year-old. "Which 5-year-old transcribed a phone call you made from your kitchen?" Porter said. "The one about $1,588 a month. The one about being a fool not to fight for it." Beverly looked at him. Her palms were still open, her head still tilted. But something behind the expression had gone very careful. "I want to call my attorney," she said. "You're welcome to," Porter said. "The FBI is going to want to talk to them anyway." The word landed the way it was meant to. The FBI. Not the county sheriff. Not the family court. The federal level, which meant the scope had already grown past what Beverly had calculated for. Her open palms closed. The legal threat came next, because charm hadn't worked. "You are interfering with a court-appointed guardianship," she said, and the martyred exhaustion was gone from her voice now, replaced with something harder. "Every person on this street is liable for harassment and civil trespass. I have a relationship with the county judge." "Judge Patricia Mercer," Cinder said. "She's been notified. She's reviewing the petition suspension request tonight." He looked at Beverly steadily. "Your relationship with her is one of the things she'd like to discuss." The legal threat ran out of road. What came next was the appeal to sympathy, which Beverly delivered with the particular fluency of a woman who had been building this version of herself for years. The sacrifice of taking in her sister's children. The stress she'd been under. The thanklessness of being the responsible one in a family full of people who couldn't manage their own lives. She'd given up her time, her privacy, her routines. And this was the gratitude she received. "Beverly." Porter's voice was quiet. 8 words. "I'm not interested in your reasons. Neither are they." Something happened then. Not dramatic. Not a collapse. The performance just stopped. All 4 of its phases, run in order, had failed, and Beverly Stokes stood in the road in front of her own house with her reading glasses in her hand and her committee folder at her side and nothing left to reach for. Her hands, which had been open, closed. "I was careful," she said. Quietly, to no one in particular. "I was so careful." The 2 deputies reached her car. When they placed her hands behind her back and read her the rights she'd believed she'd never need to hear, Beverly Stokes was not wild-eyed or defiant. She was not spitting threats. She asked once, quietly, whether someone could call her neighbor about her mail. She'd be gone for an uncertain period, and she didn't want it piling up on the step. As if that were the thing that needed handling. As if the world she'd built, and the world she'd nearly taken from 2 5-year-olds, could wait while she sorted out her correspondence. The deputies charged her that night with unlawful imprisonment of a minor. 2 counts, 1 per child, felony child endangerment, fraud upon a state court, and financial exploitation of a minor. The bail hearing was set for Monday. The judge reviewing it would have Cinder's countermotion, Donna Pruitt's signed statement, Pastor Hodges' written account of Ruth Stokes's words, and the testimony of a retired sheriff's deputy who had spent 24 years in this county and knew which facts were most important to present first. Beverly's petition to extend guardianship was suspended at 7:04 p.m. by phone order from Judge Patricia Mercer, who had, in fact, been notified, and who was, in fact, reviewing it. The hearing was no longer in 19 days. The hearing was over. It was Spector who found it. He'd been working through Beverly's filing cabinet methodically. The deputies had secured the house. The search warrant had come through at 6:40 p.m., and Spector moved through rooms the way he always did. Quietly, systematically, without assumption. First drawer, front to back. Second drawer, front to back. The third drawer had a hanging file labeled Household in Beverly's neat handwriting. Behind it was a second manila envelope, unlabeled, pushed to the back of the drawer behind a stack of utility receipts. Spector pulled it out, opened it. He stood in the back bedroom of 29 Millbrook Hollow Road, the room with the exterior deadbolt and the nailed-shut window and the single mattress, and read the first document, then the second. Then he took out his phone and called Porter. "You need to come see this," he said. "Both you and Cinder." He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. Porter had thought the worst was behind them. He was wrong. Because the worst wasn't one woman. The worst was what this one woman led back to. The chapter's war room that night was the back room of Porter's repair shop on Clover Street, the only space in Harlan County large enough for the brothers who needed to be there, private enough for what they were about to find out. Diesel sat at the head of the workbench. Cinder had his laptop open. Spector had the manila envelope. Knotwood came in from the cold at 8:17 p.m., stamped his boots, and took a chair. Razorback was already there. Ironside arrived 6 minutes later, still in his coat. Spectre laid the documents out on the workbench in the order he'd found them. "Layer 1, he said. He turned the first document toward the room. It was a bank statement. Beverly Stokes' personal account, going back 14 months. Cinder leaned forward. He tracked the columns with one finger, and as he tracked, his expression changed in the specific way of a man who recognizes a pattern he's seen before. "Look at the deposit dates," Cinder said. 15th of every month. 14 months of Social Security payments, but they started 14 months ago, not 11 days ago. He looked at Spectre. "Who were they for 14 months ago?" "Layer 2, Spectre said. He turned the second document. It was a guardianship filing, not for Faye and Opal Crane, for a different name entirely. Margaret Ann Holloway, age 7, Harlan County Family Court, filed 14 months ago. Beverly Stokes listed as emergency guardian following the mother's hospitalization for a psychiatric episode." The room went quiet. "The payments ended 9 months ago," Cinder said, running the numbers. He looked up. "Which means the guardianship ended 9 months ago. What happened at the 9-month mark?" Spectre turned the third document. It was a court filing. A motion to terminate guardianship filed by a public defender on behalf of Margaret Holloway's mother, Carrie Holloway, who had been discharged from inpatient care and was petitioning to reclaim custody of her daughter. The motion had been successful. The guardianship had ended. The Social Security payments had stopped. "Beverly was named guardian for someone else's child before Faye and Opal," Ironside said. "And fought to keep her," Cinder said. "Same pattern. Emergency placement, petition to extend, block the mother's return. It just didn't work the second time because Carrie Holloway had a decent public defender and the judge wasn't Beverly's judge." He sat back. Faye and Opal were the third attempt. The refrigerator in the shop's break room hummed. Outside, a motorcycle idled somewhere on Clover Street and cut off. "Layer 3, Spectre said. He placed the last document on the workbench. It was older. The paper had a different weight, slightly yellowed at the edges. It was a death certificate. Ruth Ellen Stokes, November 14th, 2020. Cause of death: cardiac failure secondary to malnutrition and dehydration. Age 74. Beneath it was an insurance policy. The beneficiary line read, Beverly June Stokes. The policy had been changed to sole beneficiary 6 months before Ruth's death, amended from an equal split with Lena Crane. The payout amount was printed clearly in the policy summary. $87,000. Ruth had told her pastor she felt like a prisoner. The pastor had prayed with her and left. 6 weeks later, Ruth Stokes was dead. Nobody in the room spoke for a long moment. "She started with her mother," Diesel said finally. His voice was very level. "Her own mother," Razorback said. "Same signature," Cinder said. He tapped the documents in sequence: the financial pattern, the isolation, the false reporting to authorities, the petition strategy. Isolation of the dependent, control of all outside contact, deliberate neglect, false narrative to every oversight body, and a financial target. He looked around the room. Ruth Stokes, then Margaret Holloway, then Faye and Opal Crane. 3 times. We caught her on the 3rd. Nobody spoke for Ruth, Knotwood said. The room held that. What it cost a woman to tell her pastor she felt like a prisoner, to find the words, to say them to someone whose job was to hear hard things, and to watch him pray and leave. To die 6 weeks later, alone, with the deadbolt on the outside of her door. "Nobody spoke for the Holloway girl either," Ironside said quietly. "9 months of this, and she got out because her mother happened to find a public defender who knew how to file the right motion." Cinder closed his laptop. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, then at the table. "This is a federal pattern," he said. "Social Security fraud across multiple guardianship cases. Elder financial abuse. The prior fraud charges on Ruth's estate, if the estate transfer can be contested as coerced." He paused. "The FBI has jurisdiction on the SSA fraud alone." "So we make the call," Diesel said. "We make the call," Cinder confirmed. This was the part that sat heaviest with Porter later. Not Beverly. The villain was easy to understand. Someone who had made a calculation and run it 3 times. What sat heavy was the system that had watched her do it. The family court that had taken Beverly's word on paper and not followed up. The 72-hour medical check that existed as a requirement and got skipped without consequence. The pastor who heard, "I feel like a prisoner," from an elderly woman in his congregation and classified it as spiritual complaint rather than literal report. Nobody had built these systems to be cruel, but the spaces between the requirements, the assumption that guardians could be trusted to self-report, the reliance on voluntary compliance, those spaces had cost Ruth Stokes her life and had come within 19 days of costing Faye and Opal Crane their mother. The brothers hadn't replaced the system. They'd bought the time the system needed to work. And they'd filled the gaps it had left open with the one thing no bureaucracy can replicate: the willingness of one person to pick up a note from a floor, put on his reading glasses, and open a door. Special Agent Dana Whitfield arrived at Porter's repair shop at 9:31 p.m. Plain clothes, a dark jacket, practical shoes, a face that had been working a case for longer than she wanted to admit, and had learned that exhaustion doesn't respond to coffee after a certain point. She had driven from Lexington in a little over 2 hours, which meant she had been in the car within minutes of the call. She introduced herself. Name and office, 2 sentences. Porter acknowledged this with a nod. He did not extend his hand. "I'm told you have something relevant to an open federal investigation," she said. "Depends on what you're investigating," Porter said. A pause. "Beverly June Stokes," Agent Whitfield said, "and a pattern of fraudulent SSA claims connected to emergency guardianship filings in eastern Kentucky." Porter looked at Diesel. A decision passed between them without words. Then Porter stepped back from the workbench. "How long has your office known about her?" he asked. Agent Whitfield's expression didn't change, but something in it settled. "We identified the SSA pattern on the Holloway case 9 months ago. We've been building the financial trail under the legal evidentiary standard. We needed an original document, something physical that connected Beverly directly to deliberate neglect, not just financial fraud." She paused. "The financial trail is solid. We didn't have the human evidence." "We got her out in 4 hours," Porter said. "You had 9 months." The agent had no good answer to that. She didn't pretend she did. She let the statement sit in the room, which was the right response. Porter turned to the workbench. He placed the documents from Spector's envelope one at a time. The bank statements, the Holloway guardianship filing, the insurance policy, the death certificate for Ruth Stokes. Then he placed both pieces of coloring book paper, still in their evidence sleeves. Then Spector set a small speaker on the table and played a 40-second audio recording. The recording that Cinder had been able to pull from the deleted files of Beverly's own phone. recovered with a forensic tool Spectre had on his laptop, of the kitchen conversation 3 days ago. Beverly's voice, clear and matter-of-fact. $1,588 a month, Donna. Tax-free. I'd be a fool not to fight for it. Agent Whitfield was writing when the audio started. She stopped writing. She set her pen down. She leaned forward slightly. The Holloway case only had financial records, she said. We didn't have audio. We didn't have a prior victim pattern documented in Beverly's own hand. She looked at the death certificate for Ruth. We certainly didn't have this. What does it change? Diesel asked. Scope, she said. The SSA fraud charges stand alone on the financial evidence, but with the documented pattern across 3 victims, elderly, a minor, 2 minors, the prior death, the audio. She paused. This moves from financial fraud to a federal pattern of predatory exploitation. The charges change significantly. One condition, Porter said. Agent Whitfield looked at him. Lena Crane gets a victim advocate assigned before any interview of her daughters. Nobody talks to Faye and Opal without them asking for it first. The agent looked at him steadily. We can do that. And the counter-motion to Beverly's guardianship petition stays in front of family court Monday morning, regardless of the federal timeline. Lena's hearing doesn't get delayed for federal paperwork. That's 2 conditions, Agent Whitfield said. It is, Porter agreed. A beat. Then, agreed on both. She picked up her pen. We'll be in touch. She gathered the copies she'd been permitted to make and moved toward the door. Agent Whitfield? She turned. You do right by them, Porter said. That's the job. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded and walked out into the Harlan night. The scope, when Cinder laid it out for the county prosecutor the following morning, was specific and complete. 3 victims. Ruth Ellen Stokes, deceased, age 74, whose estate had been drained of $87,000 in the months before her death, under conditions consistent with deliberate neglect. Margaret Ann Holloway, age 7 at time of guardianship, now 8, 9 months of unlawful confinement and food restriction before her mother successfully contested the placement. Faye Louise Crane and Opal June Crane, age 5, 11 days. The Social Security fraud alone represented $1,588 per month across 2 separate guardianship cases, with projected fraudulent long-term gain on the Crane girls of $247,728 had the permanent guardianship been granted. The charges filed against Beverly June Stokes: 2 counts unlawful imprisonment of a minor, felony child endangerment. 2 counts, 1 per child. Social Security fraud, fraud upon a state court. 2 counts, Harlan County Family Court, and the federal SSA claim. Financial exploitation of a minor, and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult in connection with Ruth Stokes' estate transfer. The bail was set at $340,000, the same amount Beverly had managed, as church treasurer, for the First Baptist Renovation Fund. The symmetry was not lost on the prosecutor. The Harlan County Detention Center held 2 people that Sunday morning who shared the same last name, Crane and Stokes, in separate wings of the same building. One of them was going home. The other was not. Lena Crane walked out of the Harlan County Detention Center at 11:47 a.m. on Sunday, March 20th, into a gray Kentucky morning that smelled of cold mud and coming rain. She was 27 years old, and she had been in that building for 11 days and she had called her daughters 9 times and heard nothing, and had spent 11 nights not knowing. The charge against her, a single count of drug possession, first offense, had carried a 60-day sentence. She had served 11 days. The emergency release order had been filed at 7:04 p.m. the night before. The same moment Beverly's guardianship petition was suspended, on the basis of the social services review triggered by the evidence Cinder had placed before the court. The prosecutor had reviewed Lena's file overnight. 1 charge, no prior record, a stable housing history before the arrest, 2 daughters who needed their mother. The order came through at 6:18 a.m. Ironside was in the parking lot when she came out. He was leaning against his bike, arms crossed, not because he was performing patience, but because he had learned, in 24 years of law enforcement, that the right thing to do when someone walks out of a building like that is to let them see your face first and figure out the rest at their own pace. Lena saw him. She stopped on the steps. "Your girls are at First Baptist," Ironside said. "Margaret June has been with them since last night. Razorback checked them out this morning. Both of them fine. Eating." He paused. "Faye wanted me to tell you she found a good door." Lena pressed her hand over her mouth. She stood on those steps for a full 30 seconds and didn't try to hide any of it. Then she came down the steps and got on the back of a Hell's Angels bike for the first time in her life. And Ironside drove her to her daughters without saying another word. The reunion happened in the food pantry back room, the same room where Porter had opened the door 20 hours earlier. It was not a scene that belonged to anyone watching. It belonged to the 3 of them: Lena, Faye, Opal. The door closed. What happened inside that room was not something the narrator has any business describing in detail. What can be said is this: when the door opened again 40 minutes later, all 3 Cranes walked out holding hands. Faye on Lena's right, Opal on her left. Opal still had Porter's riding jacket around her shoulders, which she had declined to return on the grounds that it was warm, and she wasn't done with it yet. Nobody argued with her. The medical visit happened Monday morning. Razorback drove them to the Harlan ARH hospital at 8:45 a.m., which meant he'd been in the parking lot of the shelter at 8:15 with a bag of breakfast sandwiches and the particular manner of a man who had thought ahead without making a production of it. He sat in the waiting room while Lena took the girls in, and he brought a children's book he'd bought at the gas station, which Faye read to Opal in the waiting room chairs with the focused seriousness of a child who takes reading very seriously. The pediatrician was a woman named Dr. Carol Avery, who had been practicing in Harlan County for 19 years and had the manner of someone who had seen a great deal and maintained her care carefully through all of it. She examined both girls. She reviewed Razorback's weight assessment from Saturday. She looked at the documented medical history, or the absence of it, 11 days without the mandatory check, which was its own kind of document. When she came out to the waiting room, she looked at Razorback directly. "Thank you for getting them here when you did," she said. Quietly, without performance. Razorback nodded. He didn't say anything. "Some thanks you just receive." The girls were 6 pounds underweight each, consistent with 11 days of deliberate caloric restriction. No lasting physical damage, Dr. Avery reported, provided nutrition was properly restored. She provided a specific refeeding plan. Not just more food, but particular foods in particular amounts, because a body that has been restricted needs to come back carefully. She printed the plan and handed it to Lena, then looked at her steadily. "Do you have somewhere safe to stay?" "Working on it," Lena said. "We have it," Razorback said from across the room. The housing solution came from a woman named Gloria Merritt, 61, who had lived on Cedar Gap Road, the same road where Lena and the girls had lived before the arrest, for 32 years. She owned the house next door to her own, a 2-bedroom rental that had sat empty since October when her last tenants moved to Lexington. She had heard what happened on Millbrook Hollow Road on Saturday evening. She had called First Baptist on Sunday morning to find out where Lena was. The Harlan County chapter raised $11,400 in 48 hours, donations from all 4 chapters that had ridden Saturday, plus a national chapter response that Diesel had quietly put out that Sunday afternoon. The amount covered 6 months of rent, the utility deposits, and a grocery run that Knotwood and his wife organized with the particular logistical efficiency of people who know how to feed a family from a standing start. Lena, Faye, and Opal moved into the Cedar Gap house on Tuesday afternoon, 2 days after Beverly Stokes' arrest. Spector carried the last box in. He handed Lena the key, an ordinary house key on a plain ring, and said, "You need anything? You call Porter." Lena looked at the key in her hand for a moment. Then she looked around the kitchen. Small, clean, the particular plainness of a place that had been empty for a while and was waiting to become a home again. "There's a cat," she said. "Muffin. We left her at the old place when—" She stopped. Spector said nothing. He just pulled out his phone and texted someone. Muffin arrived that evening, carried in a borrowed cat carrier by a 16-year-old kid from the chapter's youth volunteer program, who had been delegated to retrieve her from Lena's old rental. The cat was orange and deeply unimpressed by the journey, and walked directly to the center of the living room, sat down, and began grooming herself, as if she had always lived there. Opal sat cross-legged on the floor 2 feet away, and watched her with an expression of pure, uncomplicated happiness that Porter, who had stopped by with the rest of the canned goods from his donation boxes, would carry in his memory for a very long time. On Wednesday morning, Cinder sat across from Harlan County Family Court Judge Patricia Mercer and walked her through every document in order. He'd done this 19 years ago for the first time, in a different county, in a different case, and the ritual of it had not lost its weight. The careful placement of evidence, the deliberate pace, the moment when a judge's expression shifted from professional attention to something more personal. The look of a person who understands that a system she is part of failed to catch what it was designed to catch. "The mandatory 72-hour medical check," Judge Mercer said. "Was not completed," Cinder confirmed, "and no follow-up was triggered." The judge looked at the file. "My office approved the emergency order and sent the standard check requirement. When we didn't receive confirmation, the case was in a queue," Cinder said. "Not accusatory. Factual. The standard follow-up window is 14 days. We're at day 11. The system worked exactly as designed." He paused. "The design has a gap." Judge Mercer was quiet for a moment. "It does," she said. Faye and Opal Crane were formally returned to Lena Crane's legal custody at 10:34 a.m. Wednesday. The emergency guardianship was terminated. The petition to extend was not merely suspended, it was expunged from the record on the basis that it had been filed fraudulently while the mandatory conditions of the original order were still unmet. Beverly's lawyer had filed a motion for bail reduction. Judge Mercer denied it at the same hearing. The bail remained $340,000. Lena enrolled the girls in Harlan Elementary School on Thursday morning. She sat in the principal's office and filled out the paperwork and answered the questions, and when the principal, a man named Dale Comstock, 50 years old, who had been told by Cinder what had happened and why the girls were coming in late, asked if there was anything the school could do to support the transition, Lena said, "Just treat them like kids." He did. Faye's first-grade teacher was a woman named Mrs. Barbara Lane, 43, who had been teaching in Harlan County for 17 years and knew exactly how to make a child feel both seen and unremarkable, which is the specific skill required in that specific moment. She gave Faye a seat by the window. She did not ask her to introduce herself to the class. She simply showed her where the crayons were kept and let her get to work. Faye colored for the entire first morning. Animals, mostly. Horses. On the back of one of them, before she handed it to Mrs. Lane at the end of the day, she wrote her name in large, careful letters. Faye Crane. This is my school now. Mrs. Lane kept it on her desk for the rest of the year. The brothers said goodbye in the way brothers do, without ceremony and without lingering, each in their own manner. Razorback stopped by Cedar Gap Road on Thursday evening with a thermometer and 2 children's vitamin bottles and a printed copy of Dr. Avery's refeeding plan with certain items circled. He handed them to Lena without preamble. "Any questions about the plan, call me. Any concerns about either of them, call me first." He looked at both girls. "You doing okay?" Faye said yes without looking up from her coloring book. Opal nodded seriously, as though it were a medical assessment. Razorback nodded back. He left. Spectre stopped by Friday morning. He gave Faye his phone number written on a card. "Any time," he said. "I mean it." He said it in the specific way of someone who means it exactly as stated, without asterisks. Faye took the card and put it in the pocket of her hoodie, the pocket where she'd carried the birthday cards. Knotwood was the last to stop by, Saturday morning, a week after everything. He brought groceries, not the symbolic kind, the practical kind, based on an actual list he'd asked Lena for. He sat at the kitchen table for 20 minutes and drank a cup of coffee and talked about nothing important. The weather, the hollow, the general state of Harlan County in early spring. He did not ask how Lena was doing in the way that requires a performance of okayness. He just sat in her kitchen and was present without demanding anything from her. When he stood to leave, Opal came into the kitchen. She looked up at him. "Thank you for talking to Mrs. Gentry," she said. She had apparently been told about the porch conversation. Knotwood looked down at her. He was 69 years old and had been riding these hollows since before her mother was born, and he had seen a great deal. And he was, in this moment, visibly moved by one small girl with brown eyes saying thank you for a thing he'd done, because it was right and correct. "She talked," he said. "That's what mattered." Opal nodded, as though this confirmed something she had already understood. This story isn't really about a crayon note, or about a church food pantry, or even about Beverly Stokes. It's about the distance between seeing and acting, about how many times a person can reach toward help before the reaching breaks down. and about what it means when one person finally closes that distance. Faye Crane reached 3 times before Porter Reese opened the door. She told a neighbor, and the neighbor chose the easier comfort of accepting an explanation. She slid a paper under a door, and an adult assumed it was play. Her sister said one word to a postman, and it was explained away in real time. And Faye, who had every reason to stop trying, made a plan and crawled out a nailed-shut window and walked 4 blocks through a Kentucky hollow in 39 degrees Fahrenheit weather, with a scraped knee and her sister's shoes. That is not a story about rescue. That is a story about refusal. The refusal of a 5-year-old to accept that nobody was coming. Porter Reese closed the distance, but Faye Crane held it open long enough for him to reach it. Porter drove out to Cedar Gap Road on a Sunday evening 3 weeks after the arrest. He hadn't planned to. He'd been doing a generator repair for an elderly woman up on Ivy Gap Hollow, one of his $0 jobs, the ones he didn't advertise. And Cedar Gap was on the way back. He sat in his truck in front of Gloria Merritt's rental house for a moment with the engine running. Through the front window he could see the kitchen light on. Movement. Lena at the counter doing something ordinary, washing dishes maybe, or making dinner. And at the kitchen table, 2 small figures bent over what looked like coloring books, elbows on the table, feet swinging. Muffin the cat was visible on the windowsill, just sitting there, doing what cats do. Porter watched for about 90 seconds. He wasn't trying to be invisible. If Lena had looked up, she'd have seen the truck. But nobody looked up. They were just inside their house on a Sunday evening, being a family, doing the ordinary things that ordinary families do when they are safe. He had been 9 years old once, watching through a window, hoping someone on the outside would look in and see him. Nobody had looked in for 3 years. He thought about the note. Help us, we're hungry. 7 words in brown crayon. The misspelling of hungry that had, in the end, been the most convincing proof that it was real, because a child who was performing crisis would have spelled it correctly. He thought about Faye's face when she'd realized the door was opening. Not relief, not fear. The face of someone whose plan had worked, who had known all along what she was doing. He put the truck in reverse and pulled out onto Cedar Gap Road. The hollow was dark on both sides, the particular March becoming April dark of eastern Kentucky, the dead leaves finally giving way to something green in the gullies. The temperature was 47 degrees, warm enough that it registered. He drove for a while without the radio on. She wrote it down, he thought. She didn't wait for someone to notice. She wrote it down and she slid it under, and she left her shoes for her sister. He'd been 48 years old and hadn't done anything half that brave in recent memory. At the intersection where Clover Street met the main road, he stopped at the light and sat there for a moment in the running truck. Then he reached into his vest pocket and took out his phone. He opened the folder he kept there, labeled simply Why We Ride, and added a line. He did this after every case. It had become the ritual that told him a case was complete and carried. He typed, Faye Crane, age 5, Harlan County. She wrote it down. Then he put the phone away and drove home. 8 months later, Lena Crane started her first shift as a family advocate at the Harlan County Family Resource Center. She had applied in September, 3 weeks before she started, after seeing a posting on the bulletin board at Harlan Elementary when she'd come in for Faye's parent-teacher conference. The Resource Center was a small operation, 2 advocates and a coordinator, a state-funded program that connected families navigating the court system with services, translation help, and someone who answered the phone when they called. The position paid $17.40 an hour and required no specific credential beyond lived experience with the system and the ability to sit with someone in a hard place without flinching. Lena had both. Her supervisor, a woman named Terry, who had been running the center for 6 years, interviewed her for 20 minutes and called Porter for a reference without telling Lena she was going to. Porter told Terry 3 things: that Lena's daughters were the most self-possessed children he'd met at any age, that this tended to reflect something about the person who raised them, and that Lena Crane would be the best hire the center had made. Terry offered her the position that afternoon. The first case Lena assisted with involved a grandmother in Leslie County who had called the center because her daughter's guardianship petition, filed while the mother was in a rehabilitation facility, looked to this grandmother's eye wrong in ways she couldn't articulate. She'd called 3 different offices before the Resource Center picked up. Lena read the petition. She called Cinder. The petition had the same signature, same pattern. Different county, different name, different dependent. Cinder made 2 calls before noon, and the petition was flagged for review by the following morning. It was the second time the pattern had been caught, because of what happened in Harlan County in March. Cinder added it to the case documentation he was building for the state-level policy review he'd been asked to participate in by the Kentucky Cabinet for Health and Family Services, the same organization he'd left in 2021 after a flagged case was buried. They had called him in October. Apparently, the Beverly Stokes case had reached people who found it useful to have an 18-year veteran who knew where the gaps were. He went back. Consulting basis. On his terms. He told Porter about it over coffee at the repair shop. "I thought I was done with them," he said. "Nobody's done," Porter said. "No," Cinder agreed. "Nobody's done." The policy review Cinder contributed to resulted in a proposed change to the emergency guardianship 72-hour medical check requirement in Kentucky, specifically a mandatory confirmation receipt that the court would have to process before the check window closed, rather than relying on the guardian to self-report compliance. The change was still working its way through the legislative process, which moved the way legislative processes move, slowly and with friction. But it was moving. Razorback stopped by Cedar Gap Road in November, the week before Thanksgiving, with a turkey he'd picked up at the church food drive and a note from Dr. Avery saying both girls were at healthy weight and developing normally. He handed Lena the note first, then the turkey. Lena looked at the note for a moment, then set it on the refrigerator under a magnet. "Tell Dr. Avery thank you," she said. "Tell her yourself," Razorback said. "Your next well-child visit is December 3rd. 3 years later, Faye Crane was 8 years old, and in the 2nd grade at Harlan Elementary, where she was known primarily for her reading speed, her opinion on every book she'd ever encountered, and the fact that she was the most reliable person in her class in a crisis. The one who went to get the teacher when Marcus fell off the playground equipment, the one who sat with new kids on their first day until they looked less scared. She did this without thinking about it, which was the tell. Helping frightened people was not, for Faye, an act of courage. It was just what you did when you saw someone who needed it. On a Tuesday in October, a girl named Nora transferred into Faye's class from a county over. She was quiet, in the particular way that had nothing to do with shyness. She sat at her desk with her hands folded, and watched everything, and spoke to no one, and ate her lunch in very small bites in a manner that suggested she wasn't sure the food would last. Faye watched her for 2 days. On Wednesday afternoon, during free reading time, Faye moved her chair to Nora's table without asking, and sat down and opened her book. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't ask questions. She just sat there, reading, close enough that Nora would know she was welcome without being made to perform acceptance. After about 15 minutes, Nora said quietly, "Why are you sitting here?" Faye looked up from her book. She considered the question with the seriousness she gave to most things. "Because you looked like you could use someone to sit with you," she said. Nora looked at her. She had brown eyes that were watchful in a specific way Faye recognized from the inside. "My mom's in the hospital," Nora said. "She said it the way you say something you've been carrying alone and have finally decided to set down." "Okay," Faye said. She didn't make a face. She didn't say, "I'm sorry," in the way that closes conversation. She just accepted the information the way it had been offered, as a fact, not as a performance, not as something that required management. "Do you have someone to stay with?" Nora nodded. "My aunt." Faye looked at her for a moment. "Is your aunt good?" she said. It was a direct question, the kind only someone who already knew what the answer could mean would think to ask. Nora blinked. Something shifted in her face, surprise first, and then the careful recalibration of someone who has been asked the right question for the first time. Yeah, Nora said. "She's good. She makes soup." Faye nodded. "Okay," she said, and went back to her book. But she sat at Nora's table every day for the rest of the month. And when Nora's mom came out of the hospital, and Nora came to school one morning looking like someone had put the lights back on, Faye looked up from her book and said, "She's home?" "She's home," Nora said. "Good," Faye said, and she meant it with her whole 8-year-old self. Porter Reese found the birthday cards on a Tuesday, not the originals. Those belonged to Faye and Opal, and always had. But Lena had brought the girls by the repair shop in April, 2 months after the arrest, to return his riding jacket and to introduce herself properly, and she had brought him a photograph she'd had printed. A photograph of both cards, cleaned and dried and framed, hanging on the wall of the Cedar Gap kitchen above the table, where the girls did their homework. The water damage was still visible. She'd kept it because it meant the girls had kept them. Porter had put the photograph in his vest pocket, without saying much about it. He'd found it again now, pulling out his reading glasses for a repair estimate, and he held it in his hand for a moment, in the particular afternoon light of a March day. March again. 1 year on. He thought about the food pantry floor, the paper appearing beneath the door, the girl standing 3 feet back, ready to run, who did not run. He thought about his 9-year-old self, on the other side of a door, in a county not far from this one, in a house where the lock was on the outside and nobody came for 3 years. Nobody had come for him the way he'd gone for Faye and Opal. That wasn't bitterness. It was just the arithmetic of it. He'd been a different generation, in a different county, and the world had been built to look away from certain things with more conviction back then. But someone had eventually come. A neighbor, finally, who had made a call. Porter didn't know her name. He'd been 9 and frightened, and the details had blurred over 39 years. but the call got made. The door got opened. And everything that came after, the shop, the chapter, the 11 years of canned goods and cash left at the food pantry back door, had come from that one call. He put the photograph back in his vest pocket. He thought about what Opal had said to the judge 3 years from now. He didn't know it yet, but some things you understand in your bones before the moment arrives. He came back when he said he would. He always comes back. That's what a door does. When someone opens it, it stays open. Not forever. Not without effort. But long enough. He put his reading glasses on and went back to work. The receipt for the generator repair on his desk had billing, $0 written at the top in his own handwriting. He didn't change it. What this story is really about is the distance between noticing and acting. Most of the adults who failed Faye and Opal Crane were not bad people. Mrs. Gentry was not bad. She was a woman who trusted the wrong explanation because the right one was too heavy to carry. The neighbor who slid Faye's note back under the door was not cruel. He was a person who assumed a child playing couldn't be a child drowning. The postman was not callous. He heard one word from a silent girl and accepted the nearest comfortable interpretation. None of them were monsters. They were people who saw something that required something of them and chose the easier interpretation. You've been alive long enough to know that story. You've probably lived it from at least one side of the door. You've seen something that didn't sit right and told yourself there was probably a reason. You've heard something through a wall that you've never quite stopped thinking about. You've watched a child's face do something that didn't match what the adult nearby was saying, and you've moved on because what were you supposed to do, and who were you to interfere, and surely someone else had already. Surely someone else. Here is what I'd ask you to carry from Faye and Opal's story. The call that matters is not the heroic one. It is not the call you make after you are certain, after you've gathered evidence, after you've built an airtight case. The call that saved these girls was made by Porter Reese, who had a note written in brown crayon by a 5-year-old and a gut feeling and a history of knowing what a locked door felt like from the inside. He didn't need to be certain. He just needed to not walk past. If you know a child in a house that feels wrong, you can call the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-422-4453. It is free, it is confidential, and the person on the other end has heard harder things than whatever you're carrying. You don't have to know. You just have to say, I noticed something, and I thought I should say it. That's the whole job. On a Saturday afternoon in Harlan, Kentucky, a piece of coloring book paper slid under a door. It had a horse half-colored on one side and 7 words on the other. And one of those words was misspelled in a way that proved, without any doubt, that a child had written it. A man put on his reading glasses and read it, and opened the door. If you are the person on the outside of someone's door right now, if you have noticed something, heard something, felt something that hasn't left you, please don't wait for someone else to open it. Be the one who opens it. The note is already there. All you have to do is pick it up. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to Valiant Bikers and tell me in the comments, have you ever been the one who almost kept driving? Or were you someone who stopped? I want to hear your story. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that one person is enough. One call is enough. One door opened at the right moment is enough. 1 year before all of this, Porter Reese drove through Harlan County on ordinary business, left 2 boxes at a food pantry door, and almost walked back to his truck without picking up what was on the floor. He picked it up, and 2 little girls, who had been told by the world that nobody was coming, found out that the world was wrong.